Hey guys, it's Em, and recently I watched the new Fist of the North Star, which was a 3-part OVA series that takes place after the events of HMK 2. And it's a piece of media that was made. I have so much to say about it, I feel I have to get this out in a video somewhere. So let's just jump into it. In the first episode, our story starts with a bunch of townsfolk out gathering water, and before they know it, a random group of bandits comes in and attacks them. As you could guess, this is a setup for Ken to appear and save them. After a bit of conversing helps motivate this guy named Toby, jot this guy's name down because it'll be very important later. Not much happens, but we're told he has a brother he hasn't seen in a while, jot this down too. And after a bit more small talk, Ken makes it to Toby's village, where not much else of note happens until we're introduced to Toby's town healer, performs miracles by almost instantly healing and curing people's sicknesses. Ken introduces himself to her, and for the sake of this video, let's just call her support, because in the grand scheme of things, you'll see she's just a plot point. So anyways, after talking to Ken for a bit, we figure out she knows some branch of Huckto. I sure hope this story doesn't go off and introduce any more of those later, because that would remind me of another piece of HMK media I'm not that fond of. Anyways, not too much else happens in this scene. You'd get used to me saying that because a lot of nothing happens in this movie. Until a few moments later, when support gets kidnapped and every other villager except Toby dies. Ken and Toby learn of where she was taken to, and stop me if you heard this before, it's a city of miracles with tons of resources that somehow never been mentioned in the main story. We then cut to Toby's younger brother, performing a miracle by shooting water out of his hands. How is he doing that? Who knows? And we're gonna call him Plot Device because he also serves no real purpose in this story. Anyways, alongside him is Evil Rihaku. He's not the main villain of this story, so that's the main reason I'm not going to bother remembering his name. And basically, he searches for people who can perform miracles. So after the boys display, he brings support in front of the city and breaks somebody's bones, forcing her to heal them. During this time, you might have noticed support's design has been a little bit sexualized. Unfortunately, that will become a trend in this story, but we'll get to that when we get to that. While she's performing, Ken and Toby reach the village, and after Toby freaks out for a second, we cut to the duo breaking into the main fortress of Evil Rihaku. His main forces don't really put up that much of a fight, and then Ken squares off against them. And as you'd expect, Ken pretty much beats the dog water out of him. I wouldn't even really call it a fight because Ken doesn't even get hit. He's pretty much just ragdolling Evil Rihaku for 3 minutes. When Ken has him on the ropes, he stops for no reason. And then Plot Device strolls in for literally no reason at all, and Evil Rihaku picks up a pitchfork and throws it at Plot Device. You may say, well, Kenshiro is Kenshiro, right? And is right in front of the guy. Why didn't he stop him? And you're right, dear viewer. I legitimately have no counterpoint against you.
Yeah, lol, if only there were some big strong 7 scarred. Wait a minute.
Anyways, after that, Rihaku scrambles to a hidden water chamber room with a flamethrower. Why the fuck would you have a flamethrower in a room you store the city's water in? No one thought that was counterproductive? I genuinely can't even think of a joke because of how stupid it is. Why the hell is it there? There's nothing else in this room except water, a ledge, and a flamethrower? If you burn them, they jump in the water and they're okay. But let's just get this episode over with, I guess. So after he misses with the flamethrower on high ground, where all he had to do was aim down, Ken and him fight, and as expected, Ken pretty much shits on him. He also knocks his bloody corpse into the water, which pretty much guarantees that this city's water supply is fucked, but no one brings that up for any reason, so maybe it's just a personal problem. Ken says a little one-liner, and we're shown a little teaser of the actual main villain, Hyo with different colored hair. I'm gonna do these when we reach the end of the episode so I could give my overall thoughts on them, but episode 1, it wasn't torture, but a bit bloated. Wow, I seem to say that a lot in these Gaijins and spin-off stories. I wonder if it's a trend. So you see how long the video currently is? Yeah, it took the movie an hour to explain what I just told you.
How many chapters are there? Oh my god.
And on top of that, the story I can't really say was keeping me on the edge of my seat. There were some parts where I felt like my eyes were glazing over. A problem that'll be very prevalent in the second episode. But overall, for this episode in particular, I'd give it a 5 out of 10. It was the most middle of the road experience I've had in a while. But let's not waste too much time and jump into the worst the second episode. This episode starts with small talk between Ken, Toby, and Support as they wait for Plot Device to heal. And this little shit is not gonna wake up for a majority of the movie, so you're not gonna hear me mention him much anymore. As their speech concludes, Ken decides he should go get some medicine for Plot Device, so he heads out to a nearby city, which unfortunately forces Ken out of a majority of this episode. You know, Ken, the guy on the box, the main character of the series. Yeah, he doesn't do too much in this episode. After Ken leaves, the main villain that was teased last time strolls into the village. And since he's important, I'm gonna call him by his actual name, Seiji. So after punking a few goons laying around talking about claiming the city, some monks show up to stop him. He near effortlessly kills them, then immediately pushes up to the main building Plot Device and Support her. And before we continue, I just wanna say, I watched the English dub of this movie, and Seiji and Ken's VAs really don't do it for me. It sounds like someone try-harding to do a cool voice. Nothing against the VAs, as that's probably just the direction they were given, just I couldn't ignore the fact they both sounded like they were trying to do that TikTok voice. Back to the story, Seiji claims ownership of the entire castle. No, I didn't skip anything, it just kind of abruptly happened. And then this casually leads into the worst next 30 minutes or so of the entire 3-episode OVA. We see Toby in a jail cell, and he tries to escape and is immediately shot down. We then get a Ray Gaiden grape scene with Support. You may be asking, why is Seiji doing this? There's no reason. He just felt like it, I guess. And you said if they include stuff like this in plots, you're okay with it as long as it has weight. Yeah, I did. And this doesn't. After this point, it's mentioned once and never again. And the worst part is, it's not even by Support, who, as you'll see later, isn't even really bothered by it for some reason. And as I said, Seiji legitimately has no reason to do this at all. It doesn't even really fit his character. At least the characters in Ray Gaiden seemed like dirty degenerates anyway. Seiji doesn't seem to fit that characterization. He seems more like a less intense Rao, if anything. Someone who holds himself in a higher regard and knows he's strong. So I don't get why they made him do this. And the worst part is, in the middle of it, she tries to paralyze him. He's immune to it for reasons we'll get to in a bit, but then he knocks her out and it's heavily implied he grapes her in her sleep. I don't even know what else to say about it. It felt like the writer wanted to make you feel that Seiji's a bad guy, so they just made him do something insane to compensate for not knowing what else to make him do. They could have just made Seiji do something like Evil Rihaku, who broke some dude's ribs to prove the point that he's a dick, but they chose this. Anyways, let's continue, cause I don't know how long I could stay on this point alone. After all that, we cut to Ken, who ran into some more of those monks that Seiji killed earlier. After fighting them off, Viscount Juke arrives and begins explaining that Seiji knows Hakuman. Then we get this old fart explaining its origins for legitimately, actually, I'm not shitting you, over 10 minutes. After all of that, we cut back to Support, who is wearing the most fetishy outfit design I guess Seiji had for her, confronting him. And here we get the most dogshit scene in the entire OVA or movie. So, just to preface this, we got a few flashbacks here and there, but I skipped over them to spill it to you in this moment. You see, Evil Rihaku was Seiji's dad, and they did tough as nails training, and one day, this led to him throwing his son off a cliff. Cutting back to the flashback that's happening right now, Support was surrounded by wolves that were about to attack her. But since Seiji was so cool, after falling off the cliff, he fends off the wolves and saves her. That's right, folks. Seiji here, the guy who just raped her in her sleep, is her love interest. I don't even know what you want me to tell you at this point. The writing for these two is so bad, there's not much I can comically add to it. After that, we get a scene of Toby in a cell with his brother, and we see Ken about to head back to the city to deal with Seiji after learning about Hakuman. And that's the end of this episode. To recap for this one, it was the most boring, mentally exhausting thing I've seen in recent memory. I've already in many words explained why I don't like the grape scene. The Hakuman Vadi video lore was literal brain rot. Every minute in this section felt like a decade, and I verbalized how dumb it is to make Seiji and Support like each other. They could have just made her angry at him and point out that he's changed, and in this story she does point out that he's different, but for some reason, she's not mad at him. All they had to do was take the color out of her eyes, the classic emotionless anime look, and at least you could say she seemed distraught about it, but it never gives that off. Hell, with the way she treats him after that scene, you'd think nothing happened. If you went to grab a water bottle and came back afterwards, episodes. You just assume she started dressing kinky and hanging around him. It's so badly written to the point where this might have made them two of the worst OCs I've seen in H&K spin-off material. Because they're not bland and forgettable, they're just horrible. I'd give this section a 2 out of 10 at best. It's so bad I wish I could scrub it from my brain. It goes from boring to downright offensive with literally nothing redeemable about it. That's pretty much all I gotta say on this, so let's move on to the final episode or segment. To start off, Ken comes back to the city and meets up with Toby, who escaped his jail cell during the night with plot delays. After a bit of conversation, he tells Ken that they should talk outside, and while they're talking, he traps Kenshiro in a room with iron bars. Now, there are two questions you might be having. Number one, why did he do that? Well, a teeny detail I didn't bring up until now is that at the end of the last episode, Toby just went insane. Why? I don't know. It just kind of happened. And I don't mean he just went a little wonky. I mean straight up Dead Rising villain type crazy, where he starts a cult and leads a rebellion against Seiji. It's the most random thing they put in this story that ultimately doesn't mean much, but it's there. And back to the second question you might be having. Can't Ken break iron bars since he's Ken and has literally done it before in the show? Nope. He's a little Stromboli-armed weakling, so we aren't gonna see him for a good chunk of the story after this. Now you may be saying, this is the new Fist of the North Star. Why is Ken not in 80% of the movie? I got no fucking idea, dear viewer. Not even in the slightest. But after all that, Toby's army that he magically formed overnight seemingly fights Seiji's army, and they're somehow winning, despite the fact they just poofed into the plot. They're apparently pretty strong. Then Seiji gives the best orders to his men, and basically goes, "We're losing, fight harder!" As a quick note, he says this 3 separate times moving forwards, but I'm probably gonna skip those scenes. The next 20 or so minutes is the great Toby Seiji war. And as anyone with common sense could guess, the second Seiji comes out, he immediately shits on a majority of the army. So while Toby and his guys are getting their shit rocked, we cut to support finding Ken and her giving him energy so he can break free of the iron bars. Ken, the successor of Hokuto Shinken, needed extra ki to break through metal bars. Ken then heads to the room Toby's troops took him to after they lost. He then gives his final speech that I think we're meant to care about, even though this character was dog shit through and through. And after he beats 2 of his little goons, Seiji and Ken meet and the final fight of the movie begins. And it's a fight that occurs. To be fair to it, it's animated quite nice, but it's missing a few things. Unlike literally every fight in H&K where the villain gets at least one special attack, none are done in this fight. Nothing flashy happens, it's mostly just 2 dudes swinging at each other, which is disappointing considering what anime this is. Also, this movie or OVA episodes are meant to be set after H&K 2, which would happen to mean Ken should know MT by this point. For me to believe that Seiji is this ultimate badass to stand up to Ken, especially at this point of time, is a stretch. Apparently they state in the novel they're meant to be equals, but in this movie, it really doesn't feel that way at all. He hits Ken like 2 times before Ken immediately begins dumpstering him. After Ken's done beating him so bad, he literally started fucking levitating. This old lady who didn't really matter, so I didn't bring her up, and support come in to say how they loved him. And even Seiji's dad, who I will remind you, threw him off a fucking cliff earlier, also apparently loved him. This was enough to move Seiji, to which he then unalives himself, and the movie comes to an end. This was an experience and definitely a movie, or set of OVA episodes that was made. Truth be told, I don't even have that much to add here because I feel I covered most of it while we were going through this plot.
So that was a fucking lie.
This is probably one of the worst side material H&K things I've seen. The general pacing is so slow it leads to a lot of scenes dragging on or being really boring. The original characters here are genuinely some of the worst we've ever had, and the writing is awful. And a Gaiden, it wouldn't be that bad. Like, I still to this day think Garuda Gaiden was kinda shit, but at least it was short. But here, this shit altogether is 3 fucking hours long. I felt like an entire lifetime went by when we hit the 10-minute mark. By the time Seiji showed up, I looked like a ghoul from boredom. The worst thing is, I don't feel it'd be that difficult to write an interesting story post H&K 2. You have Ken at his strongest and emotionally at his best after interacting with all the other characters in the story. The wackiest martial art ideas are opened up to you, and you have any of the surviving cast to play around with. But Shin H&K, or New H&K, barely does anything with any of that. Truth be told, you could have set this story after HNK 1 due to the fact that literally nothing of HNK 2 seems to really matter in this story, and it wouldn't change anything at all. But let's keep going. Seiji being so boring is damn near offensive. Ignoring the literal actual offensive shit he does to support, he does nothing. No cool techniques, no quotable moments, nothing. If we count this as canon, which I'm personally trying not to, he would genuinely be the worst HNK villain for me. I don't like Yuta, but he at least ties into Rei's story. Borge was cucked by the stupid writing of his arc, so that's more of that problem than him being bad as a character. Seiji doesn't have anything. He's just flat out ass. The easiest way to fix him would be to make him some kind of foil to Ken, or the ultimate challenge that requires Ken to use all of his skills perfectly to defeat him. But no, story-wise, he doesn't have much similarities to Ken at all, other than Hakuman and Hakuto being related. Skill-wise, Ken literally just beats the fuck out of him without needing any techniques, so I can't even say that works either.
First of all, Sir Jordans are completely fake.
The supporting cast is just stupid. Sarah, who was support's name by the way, was someone's kinky fetish that barely had any character other than walking around in progressively skimpier clothing. Toby sucks. Seiji's dad, or Evil Rihaku, kinda just felt like a plot device considering he only loosely mattered in like one scene past his death. And I'm sure I could go on, but I'm pretty sure you get the point. So, I guess this is where you want me to rate it, I would give this a 1 out of 10. Legitimately do not waste your time watching this film. I can't think of a single redeeming quality to it, at all. And unlike Rei Gaiden, where it's at least kind of fun to dunk on how terrible the writing was, Shin HNK commits the cardinal sin of being boring and ass. And as I said earlier, it's also 3 hours long. Regardless of all of that blabbing I just had to do, what do you guys think about it? Is there some small, very small, pretty much minuscule, gleaming light at the end of this tunnel? Or do you also think it was awful? As always, as long as you're respectful, I'm glad to discuss with you guys in the comments. And I've been in, and I am out.